They really thought they could throw me out on the street and I'd just disappear forever. My own in-laws, they actually celebrated, thinking it was my final defeat, that my failure would prove their cruelty was justified all along. What they didn't know was that I was about to become their new landlord and hand them the ultimate eviction notice. This isn't just a revenge story. It's about reclaiming your life when the people who were supposed to have your back try to burn it all down. This is how I bought their house right out from under them. For more stories about getting even and karmic justice, make sure you subscribe. You're not going to want to miss what's coming next. Like a lot of these stories, mine starts with a wedding. When I married Sarah, I wasn't just getting the love of my life. I was marrying her family. On the surface, her parents, Mark and Karen, were pillars of the community. They had this beautiful 2-story house on a street where the lawns were always perfect. That house wasn't just a home. It was their castle, the #1 symbol of a success they never missed a chance to bring up. Mark was some mid-level exec at a regional bank, which gave him a comfortable life and a massive ego. Karen was a homemaker who acted like the CEO of the family, and the rest of us were her unpaid, underappreciated interns. I knew from day one they didn't approve of me. I didn't come from money. My parents were blue-collar, teaching me the value of a hard day's work, not the secrets of a stock portfolio. I was an IT specialist, a world of code that was totally foreign to Mark's world of golf course handshakes. To them, I was a stable but unimpressive guy for their daughter. I was serviceable, reliable, like a good refrigerator. You need one, but you don't exactly brag about it. The condescension was subtle at first, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Karen would offer me unsolicited career advice, suggesting I get a real job with a ladder. At family barbecues, Mark would clap me on the shoulder a little too hard and ask, "Still playing with computers, son?" Then turn to his buddies and laugh like I was the punchline to a joke I wasn't in on. Sarah, bless her heart, didn't really see it. She thought they were just quirky and overbearing, not malicious. "That's just how they are," she'd say with a smile. They mean well. For 5 years, I swallowed my pride for Sarah's sake. I loved her and I just wanted peace. We spent holidays at their place, and I poured my own sweat into maintaining their precious castle. I was the one fixing their Wi-Fi, debugging their laptops, and I spent a whole summer building them a new deck because a contractor's quote was, as Mark put it, highway robbery. I laid every board and drove every screw. I'll never forget Karen bringing me lemonade one sweltering afternoon, giving me her thin, reptilian smile and saying, "It's so wonderful Sarah found a man with useful hobbies." Hobbies. Not skills, hobbies. As if all my labor was just a cute little pastime. Despite all that, we were building a life. Sarah and I had a small apartment, but her dream was a house. Specifically, a house like her parents. One day, she'd whisper, "We'll have a home just like that. A forever home." And I believed her. I was working my tail off, saving every dime. I thought if I could just hit that benchmark of success, I could finally earn their respect. I could finally go from being the computer guy to a son-in-law. But that tension was always there, a low hum of disapproval under everything. They saw me as a starter husband for their perfect daughter. They were just patiently waiting for her to realize she'd married beneath her. My lack of inherited wealth wasn't a challenge I'd overcome. To them, it was a character flaw. I was just a guest in their world, and my visitor's pass was about to expire. I just didn't know it yet. The beginning of the end came fast and without warning. The company I'd been with for a decade announced a major restructuring. My entire department was gone. In a single afternoon, my stable, reliable job vanished. I got a small severance package and a cardboard box. It was a shock, sure, but not a catastrophe. I was good at my job and confident I'd find something else. For me, it was a setback. For Mark and Karen, It was the opening they'd been waiting for. When I told Sarah, she was supportive, but her first move was to call her parents. That should have been a massive red flag. She saw them as a safety net. I was starting to see them as the spiders who built the web. We went over for dinner that Sunday, and the air was thick with fake sympathy. Karen kept patting my hand, saying, "Don't you worry, we'll take care of our little girl. Not us, not you, our little girl." Mark sat at the head of the table like a judge. He let me explain my plans, my job leads, the interviews I already had lined up. He just listened with this patient, condescending smirk, swirling his wine. Finally, he set the glass down. The verdict was in. "Let's be honest, son," he started, the word son dripping with patronage. "This IT thing ... it was never a real career. It's a young man's game. You had a good run, but it's over." I tried to argue, to explain that the industry was booming. He just waved his hand, dismissing my entire professional life. "The point is," he said, his voice turning to ice, "Sarah is used to a certain standard of living. A standard that you," he paused for effect, "are no longer able to provide." Karen jumped in, her voice all sweet and poisonous. "We just think it would be best for Sarah to come home for a while, just until you're back on your feet. There's no sense in her having to struggle." The room went silent. I looked at Sarah, my wife, expecting her to explode, to tell them we were a team and we'd face this together. Instead, she just stared at her plate, her eyes filling with tears. She said nothing. Her silence was my sentence. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark leaned forward. "We're saying we're taking our daughter home. We've already spoken to a lawyer. We'll be funding the divorce. It's for the best. You can't provide for her, and we won't let her sink with you." It was a coup, perfectly planned and ruthlessly executed. They were ending my marriage, using my lowest professional moment to get what they always wanted: me gone. The fight that followed was ugly. I pleaded, I reasoned, I got angry. Brought up everything, the years of loyalty, the deck I built, the endless free tech support. It meant nothing. My contributions were transactional, and my stock had just hit zero. The final blow came from Karen. As I stood in their hallway, totally defeated, she walked over to me. No tears, no regret, just a cold, triumphant glint in her eyes. "You have to understand," she said, her voice chillingly low. "It's not personal. It's about protecting our assets. And Sarah is our most important asset." They drove me back to our apartment, the one I could no longer afford. Sarah sat silently in the back seat. When we got there, Mark got out and handed me a check. "A final severance," he called it, "to help you land on your feet. Somewhere else." Standing on that curb, watching my wife get driven away by the people who had just dismantled my life, I felt the full weight of it all. They weren't just kicking me out. They were trying to erase me. They wanted me to be a cautionary tale, a story they'd tell to prove how they'd saved their daughter from a terrible mistake. They thought I would break. They thought I'd end up on the street. They underestimated me, and that was the biggest mistake they ever made. The first few weeks were just a gray fog of despair. I was a ghost in my own apartment, a place that used to be full of life and was now just silent. Sarah's things were gone, removed with surgical precision. All that was left was an indent on her side of the bed. The divorce papers arrived via courier, as impersonal as a corporate layoff. I spent my days firing off job applications and my nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every condescending remark from Mark, every fake smile from Karen. They had won. I was alone, unemployed, and about to be homeless. This was the rock bottom they had so generously provided for me. For a month, I let myself wallow. I lived off my severance and Mark's parting gift, which I hated myself for cashing. I was adrift. But one night, something shifted. I was scrolling through old photos and found one of me and Sarah on the deck I built. We were smiling, but you could see Mark in the background, watching us with that familiar, judging stare. In that moment, the grief turned into something else. It started to burn. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was cold, clear rage. They expected me to fail. They had written the end of my story. No, I would not be their cautionary tale. I would be their reckoning. That night, a plan started to form. It wasn't just about getting a new job anymore. It was about building an empire. It wasn't about getting back on my feet. It was about climbing so high I could look down on them. And the ultimate symbol of their world? Their house. Their castle. A new goal clicked into place, as crazy as it was beautiful. I was going to buy their house. It was a fantasy, I knew, but it was the fuel I needed. I had about $15,000 left. Not much, but it was a start. I moved out of our expensive apartment and into a tiny, windowless room I rented off Craigslist. My world shrank to a mattress, a desk, and a laptop. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. Every single dollar I didn't spend on survival went into my revenge fund. My old job was corporate IT, but my real passion was cybersecurity specifically, a niche and boring field. Compliance for small businesses using ancient software. New regulations meant they had to meet tough security standards, but they couldn't afford big consulting firms. They were stuck. I knew how to get them unstuck. I used my $15,000 to build a simple subscription software platform. A SaaS. I called it Nemesis. It was a set of tools that could talk to their ancient systems, run security audits, and spit out the compliance reports they needed to stay in business. I was coding 20 hours a day. I didn't sleep. I took power naps. My world was nothing but code. I cold called hundreds of businesses. The first month, I landed one client. Just one. For $500 a month. Oh, it wasn't a lot, but it was proof of concept. The second month, that client referred me to two more. I was at $1,500 in monthly recurring revenue. I poured every penny back into the business. By month 6, I was at $5,000 a month. By the end of the first year, Nemesis was pulling in over $15,000 a month. I still lived in that tiny room. I still ate noodles. My friends thought I was insane, working myself to death and living like a monk. They didn't get it. I wasn't just building a company. I was forging a weapon. The second year, things exploded. A major trade journal wrote a feature on the compliance crisis and named Nemesis as the only real solution for small businesses. The floodgates opened. I had to hire 2 part-time support staff. My monthly revenue hit $30,000, then $40,000, and it was almost all profit. My overhead was basically nothing. I was saving over 90% of my income. I lived like a pauper, but my bank account was growing at a staggering rate. I hired a wealth manager and a lawyer. I wasn't just a disgruntled ex-husband anymore. I was a founder, a CEO, and I was becoming very, very rich. All this time, I heard nothing from Sarah or her family. Complete silence. I was dead to them, just like they wanted. I imagined they figured I was struggling at some low-level help desk job, just as Mark predicted. The thought of how wrong they were kept me going. 2 years and 3 months after they kicked me out, I had over $700,000 in cash. I was still living in that miserable little room, but the numbers on the screen told a different story. I started watching real estate listings in my old town. Then, one Tuesday morning, there it was. The Colonial on the perfectly manicured street. My in-laws' house. For sale. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The listing was full of tells. Motivated seller, price to move. To me, it read like a battle plan. Mark must have gotten hit by his own company's restructuring. They were over-leveraged and needed out, fast. The asking price was $1.25 million. It was time. The weapon I'd spent 2 years forging was finally ready to fire. The second I saw that listing, everything went into slow motion. Every sleepless night, every line of code, every lonely bowl of noodles led to this exact moment. This wasn't a time for hesitation. It was time for precision. My first call wasn't to a realtor. It was to a high-powered corporate lawyer. I laid out the whole backstory with cold, detached clarity. He didn't even blink. This guy dealt with hostile takeovers. A family drama wrapped in a real estate deal was just another Tuesday. His advice was simple: total anonymity. We'd form a shell company, an anonymous LLC, to be the buyer. They wouldn't know who was on the other side of the deal until it was way too late. Within 48 hours, Pine Ridge Holdings, LLC existed. Generic name, registered in another state, a ghost. Our strategy was designed to be an offer they couldn't refuse. We made an all-cash offer of $1.3 million, $50,000 over asking. No mortgage, no inspections, no appraisals. Just a clean, overwhelming pile of cash that sellers dream about. Their agent came back with one small request. They wanted a 30-day post-closing occupancy. Basically, after my LLC owned the house, they could stay on for 1 month as tenants to give them time to move. My lawyer and I looked at the request, and it was like they'd handed us the final, perfect piece of the plan. We agreed instantly and drafted an ironclad rental agreement. The rent was next to nothing, but the end date was absolute. 30 days, not 1 day more. They bit. Of course they bit. They saw an over-asking, all-cash offer from some faceless investment company and probably popped champagne. They signed the papers without a second thought. The whole closing was handled by our lawyers. I wired the $1.3 million, and just like that, it was done. I owned their castle. Those next 30 days were the longest of my life. I knew they were living in my house, eating in my kitchen, sleeping in what was now my master bedroom. I let them have that final month of ignorant bliss, packing their boxes, thinking back on the life they'd built inside those walls, never suspecting who bought it. On the morning of the 31st day, I woke up, put on the most expensive suit I owned, and drove my new car, a sleek, dark German sedan, to their, now my, street. I parked across from the house and just watched for a minute. No moving truck, no boxes on the lawn, no sense of urgency at all. They thought the deadline was a suggestion. They were about to learn that Pine Ridge Holdings was not flexible. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked up the stone path and rang the doorbell. Mark answered in his pajamas, holding a cup of coffee. He just stared at me, his brain trying to process what he was seeing. Confusion, then annoyance. "What are you doing here?" he asked with that old, familiar condescension. I gave him a calm, empty smile. "Good morning, Mark. I'm here about the house." "The house? What about it?" he snapped. Karen appeared behind him, clutching her robe. "What is he doing here?" she whispered to Mark. "That's what I'm trying to find out," he said, turning back to me. "This is private property. You need to leave." I held up a single key. "Actually," I said, my voice perfectly level, "it's my property. Pine Ridge Holdings, LLC. I'm the owner." The color drained from their faces. Mark's jaw went slack. Karen's hand flew to her mouth. They looked at each other, pure, dawning horror in their eyes. The computer guy, the failure they'd tried to erase, was on their doorstep, holding the key to their kingdom. You bought our house?" Karen stammered. "I did," I said, "and our agreement states you were to be out by midnight last night. Your 30-day occupancy has expired." Mark found his voice, a weak imitation of his old authority. "Now, hold on. We just need a little more time, a week or two. You can't just ... I cut him off. "Remember when you told me to get out of your house?" I asked. The question hung in the air, and I could see the memory, and my words hit them like a physical blow. "Well, now it's my house, and I need you out," I continued, my voice betraying zero emotion. "You have until the end of the day to remove your things. I have a moving crew scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow to clear out whatever's left. Those items will be put in storage at your expense or thrown away, as per the agreement you signed. Then came the begging. It was pathetic. All that pride just dissolved into this desperate, whining plea for more time. They talked about their memories, about Sarah, about how this was all a misunderstanding. They tried to appeal to a sense of decency they never had. I just stood there unmoved, like a stranger representing a holding company. I was just enforcing a contract. Their contract. The terms are non-negotiable, I said, my voice final. You have until 5 o'clock. I turned and walked away without looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel their world collapsing behind me. The sound of their shock and despair was the sweetest thing I had ever heard. The king and queen had been dethroned. Their castle had fallen. And I was the one holding the flag. I didn't stick around to watch. The legal machine was already doing its job. I went to a cafe, ordered a coffee, and got a series of frantic, pleading texts from a number I didn't recognize. It was Sarah. Her parents had called her hysterical. She begged me to show compassion. She said I was destroying her family. I read the message, took a sip of my coffee, and deleted the thread without a word. Her family was destroyed the day they decided I wasn't part of it. I was just cleaning up the wreckage. The next morning at 8 a.m. sharp, the movers arrived, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy to keep the peace. The crew foreman called me an hour later. He said Mark and Karen were still there, frantically throwing things in boxes, faces stained with tears and fury. They'd been up all night, being evicted by their own past. I heard what happened next through the grapevine. Mark and Karen, broke and broken, had to move into a small townhouse on the other side of town, the kind of place they would have openly mocked a year ago. Their social circle, built on the image of that house, vanished. Success has many friends, but failure is an orphan. The story of how their ex-in-law bought their house out from under them became a local legend, a whispered tale at the country club they couldn't afford anymore. They became the very cautionary tale they had intended for me. Sarah tried to contact me a few more times. One last, desperate voicemail, crying and asking how I could be so cruel. Cruel? Cruelty is your father-in-law telling you your marriage is over because you lost your job. Cruelty is your wife standing by silently while you're thrown out like trash. What I did wasn't cruelty. It was a consequence. It was the bill, finally coming due. And the house? Their castle? My prize? 2 weeks after the movers cleared it out, I put it back on the market. I never spent a single night there. It was never the prize. It was the weapon. Taking it from them was the victory. Living in it would have felt like living in a tomb full of bad memories. I sold it in less than a month to a young family, making a nice little profit. I used the money to buy a penthouse apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the whole city. A place that is entirely mine, with no ghosts. Sometimes I think about what I did. I don't feel glee or pleasure. The anger is gone. I just feel ... quiet, a deep sense of peace. They tried to write me out of the story to make me a footnote of failure. I just refused their edit. I picked up the pen and wrote my own ending. An ending where I didn't just survive, I thrived. My company, Nemesis, keeps growing. I've built a new life defined by my own achievements, not by anyone else's approval. They thought kicking me out was the end of my story. They were wrong. It was the beginning. So what would you have done? Would you have been as ruthless, or would you have walked away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories where the scales of justice finally get balanced, don't forget to subscribe, because karma always gets the final word.